The moment my niece looked me straight in the eye at the dinner table and called me a nobody, and the whole family burst into laughter like it was the funniest joke in the world. Something inside me cracked so loudly that I swear even I heard it echo in my own chest. I just sat there frozen, trying to decide whether to laugh it off like they expected or walk out of that house forever. Because the worst part wasn't even her words. It was the way everyone, my siblings, my parents, even relatives who barely knew me, found it so easy to treat me like I was invisible. Like I wasn't someone who had spent years breaking my back trying to support them whenever they needed something. And as they kept laughing, and my niece smirked like she had just won some stupid competition, a question burned inside my head. Was I wrong for what I did afterward? Because what happened the next morning, when they were all panicking, scrambling, arguing, and blaming each other, was something none of them saw coming. Maybe I shouldn't have handled things the way I did. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. But honestly, if you were in my place, would you have done anything different? Tell me, because sometimes I really wonder. Anyway, let me go back to how this whole mess even started. Because this wasn't just about one rude comment made by a kid. This was the result of years, literal years of being treated like the useless background character in my own family. Growing up, I was the middle child. Not the eldest who gets all the responsibility and respect, and not the youngest who gets all the attention and excuses. I was just there. The one everyone forgot to include. The one who took the family pictures but never appeared in them. The one asked to help but never thanked. At first, I thought that's just how families work. Someone always ends up in the shadow. But as I got older, it became clear that my siblings had built their entire personalities around bragging about themselves while making sure I never shined in any way. My sister Jenna was the dramatic one, always telling stories about her perfect daughter, her perfect life, and her perfect career as an event planner. She loved attention the way some people love oxygen. My older brother Mark was the so-called successful businessman in the family. He'd done one good investment years ago, got lucky, and now walked around like he invented money. And my parents, they worshipped those two like gods. I was just the extra they tolerated. Fast forward to a week before the dinner. The family dinner that became the beginning of the end of whatever relationship we had. Jenna had invited everyone to celebrate her daughter's birthday, early since the kid wanted a special grown-up dinner. The girl, my niece Chloe, was 13 going on 30. She had her mother's confidence but none of her mother's boundaries, and every adult around her constantly told her how smart, talented, and mature she was, even when she was just being plain rude. Me. I'd never had a problem with her before, mostly because I didn't interact with her much. And honestly, I assumed she at least respected me. I guess that was my mistake. The night of the dinner, I arrived with a small gift, something thoughtful but simple, a sketching kit because she liked drawing. I wasn't trying to compete with the more expensive gifts she always got. I just wanted to give her something meaningful. I walked in, greeted everyone, and instantly felt that familiar heaviness, like entering a sanctuary where I wasn't welcome. My mother barely looked up before saying, "You're late." Even though I wasn't. My father didn't even stand, just raised a half-hearted hand. Jenna was wearing a sparkly dress and acting like she was hosting the Oscars. And Mark, he gave me that look he always gave, the one that silently said, "Try not to embarrass yourself tonight." Dinner started fine. There were the usual bragging sessions. How well Mark's business was doing, how many clients Jenna had booked, how Chloe was practically a genius compared to other kids her age. I mostly stayed quiet, nodding when necessary, drinking water, eating slowly, trying not to take up too much space. That's how it always was. But then Jenna decided to play one of her little games, going around the table and making everyone share. One thing they accomplished this year that they're proud of. She loved these moments because they gave her a chance to take subtle digs at me by comparison. When it came to me, I mentioned something simple, but genuine, that I had recently completed a project at my job that I'd been working on for months, and my boss had praised me for it. Before I could even finish, Mark let out a laugh, not a normal laugh, but that dismissive kind someone gives when they think you're ridiculous. "Oh, come on," he said, shaking his head. "Your little office projects don't count as accomplishments. We're talking real achievements." Real achievements. Those words stung more than I wanted to admit. I felt my face heat up, but before I could respond, Chloe, my niece, leaned back in her chair, tapped her spoon against her glass for attention, and said with a smirk that made my skin crawl, "Why are we even asking him? He's literally a nobody." and the whole table erupted. They laughed. Loudly, like she just told the greatest joke of the century, my parents. They didn't even hide their amusement. Jenna was wiping tears from her eyes. Mark slapped the table grinning. And Chloe just sat there with that smug expression, soaking in the validation she'd earned from humiliating me. In that moment, sitting in a room filled with people related to me by blood but connected to me by nothing else, I felt something shift. Something small but powerful. I thought about walking out. I thought about yelling. I thought about saying something cutting and cruel. But instead, I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it. I forced a smile and pretended like it didn't hurt. But deep inside, I made a decision. This was the last time they were ever going to treat me like I didn't matter. After dinner, I went home and replayed the entire scene in my head again and again. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking, why have I let them treat me like this? Why have I allowed myself to become their punching bag? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. I had something they didn't know about. Something they never bothered to ask me about. Something big. And it wasn't money, it wasn't fame, it wasn't status. It was something else, an opportunity that I'd been quietly preparing for years. One that involved all of them, whether they knew it or not. Let me explain. For the past 4 years, I'd been working in a tech research division for a multinational company. It wasn't glamorous by their standards, but it was important, secure, and well paid. More importantly, I'd been put in charge of handling a new investment partnership the company was launching privately. It was the kind of investment that required trust, stability, and confidentiality. And my family, well, ironically, they were on a list of potential early investors because of the businesses my siblings claimed to run so well. They had been recommended, not by me, but by someone who didn't know what they were actually like. And they had no idea that I was the point person who would decide whether or not they would be invited to participate. This wasn't some tiny deal. This was life-changing money, generational wealth kind of money. They would have jumped at the opportunity. But because they never took me seriously, they never asked about my job, never asked what I did, never even acknowledged the work I put in. And that night, after being laughed at like I was worthless, I decided I wasn't going to give them the chance to benefit from something they believed I could never be responsible for. But here's the twist. I didn't make the decision out of spite, at least not fully. I made it because I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn the approval of people who were never going to give it, and I was done, completely done. The next morning, I woke up to over 20 missed calls and a flood of messages from my family. At first, I thought maybe someone was sick or something serious had happened. But no. They were panicking about something else entirely. Something I hadn't expected them to find out so quickly. I'll explain how that happened in part 2. But before I continue, I want you to really think about the situation I was in. Imagine being humiliated by the same people who had no idea how much power you quietly held in your hands. Imagine finally having the upper hand after years of being treated like you didn't matter. So that's the situation I found myself in, and I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause for a second and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Seriously. Would you have told them everything? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have gotten revenge? Because the next part of this story, well, let's just say things escalated fast, and not in the way anyone expected. When I saw all those missed calls that morning, 23 to be exact, I didn't know whether to laugh, ignore them, or throw the whole phone in the trash and start a new life somewhere far away. The messages were all over the place. My mom, call me now, it's urgent. My dad, why didn't you tell us about this? Jenna, I need to talk to you, RIJHTNO. Mark, pick up your phone, man. This is serious. Even Chloe, the little queen of insults herself, had messaged me with a crying emoji and, Mom says call her. It was the first time in my life that all of them seemed desperate to talk to me, and of course, the irony made me laugh. Because just 12 hours earlier, I was the nobody at the table. But suddenly, it was like I had become the most important person in the entire family overnight. I didn't respond to any of them at first. I took my time, made coffee, sat on the couch, stared at the wall, and let them panic. You have no idea how peaceful it felt. Like I had been waiting my whole life for a moment where they finally needed something from me, instead of just taking me for granted. I was honestly prepared to enjoy their little meltdown all day, but a knock on my door interrupted that plan. Not just any knock either. That rapid, frantic knocking that only happens when someone thinks the world is ending. I opened the door and found Jenna standing there, hair messy, eyes swollen, breathing heavily like she had run the entire way to my apartment. She didn't even say hello. She pushed her way inside like she owned the place, turned to me, and said, "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell me?" The audacity, I swear for a moment I thought I was dreaming. I closed the door slowly behind her and leaned against it, arms crossed, watching her pace around my living room. I asked her calmly, "What exactly didn't I tell you?" She stopped pacing and glared at me, like I was the one who had wronged her. "About your job, about this investment thing, about being part of a company doing something this big. Mark told me everything?" That part made me raise an eyebrow. I hadn't told anyone anything. So how did Mark find out? Well, as it turned out, someone else had caused the chaos without me even lifting a finger. Apparently, my company had begun sending out automated pre-invitation emails to those who met the initial internal requirement list. It wasn't the real offer, just a formality that acknowledged their business records had been reviewed. My siblings' business names, purely due to dumb luck and outdated data, had made the list. The pre-invitation email had my name attached at the bottom as the point of contact. That alone was enough to make all hell break loose. Because for the first time ever, they realized I had a job that was actually important, something big, something that could benefit them, something that made me not just useful, but needed. And the funniest part, their first instinct wasn't pride, it was panic, because the email also mentioned that the final decision would be based on further review and approval by the assigned project coordinator, which was me, the nobody, the one they laughed at, the one their daughter insulted to his face. I let Jenna continue her dramatic pacing for a moment before I finally said, "Maybe I didn't tell you because you never cared to ask." That stopped her dead in her tracks. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because she knew it was true. For years I'd sat at family events listening to them brag about themselves without once asking me how I was doing, what I was working on, or what I had accomplished. I was nothing to them, a convenient extra body. She softened her tone, her voice trembling slightly. "Look, I know we've all been busy, but this is huge. It could help me help Mark, help all of us." I almost laughed. She really didn't see the irony. I stayed silent, waiting to hear the rest. She stepped closer to me and said, "Please tell me you're going to approve us. We deserve this chance. We deserve." Funny how only existed when they wanted something from me. Before I could respond, my door knocked again. This time it was Mark, then my parents. Within minutes, my entire family was inside my apartment, talking over each other, acting like victims of some crisis I had created just by existing. They sat on my couch, my chairs, even leaned on my walls, all looking at me like I held their fate in my hands. And for the first time in my life, I actually did. My dad spoke first, rubbing his forehead dramatically. "Son, why didn't you tell us you had this kind of job? We would have supported you." Another lie. They didn't support me when I needed them. They didn't support me when I went through job transitions. They didn't support me when I struggled financially in the past. They barely even acknowledged my achievements. But now that they saw dollar signs, now suddenly they cared. I asked the question calmly, even though I already knew the answer. "Why? So you could mock me for it too?" Silence. Heavy silence. My mother tried to smile, her voice artificially sweet. "Oh honey, you know we love you." Families joke sometimes. My jaw tightened. "Jokes don't usually end with everyone laughing at me like I'm trash," I said. They shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, I could feel the power shift in the room. They finally realized I wasn't the same quiet pushover anymore. Mark cleared his throat. "Look, man, yesterday might have gotten a little exaggerated. But this investment opportunity, this is serious money. You can't let some silly comment from a kid ruin that for us." I stared at him. "A kid," I repeated slowly. "You mean your niece? The one you all trained to speak to me like I'm beneath her?" Chloe shrank back against my mom like a scared puppy. But she wasn't scared last night when she insulted me and bathed in applause. I took a deep breath. "Tell me something," I said to the room. "If you think so highly of yourselves, why do you even need my approval?" That question sliced through the air like a blade. Because the truth was simple, they needed me. And they hated that they needed me. My father sighed heavily. Because the economy is unstable. Because business is tough. Because we could use the help. This was the first honest thing he had said in years. And it hit me harder than any insult ever had. They were struggling. They just hid it under layers of ego and performance. And now that they had a chance at a lifeline, they were terrified I might say no. And they should have been terrified. But I wasn't out for revenge. Not fully. I just wanted honesty, accountability, something they had never given me before. So I said, if you want me to approve your applications, then you're going to give me something first. Their eyes lit up like children being told they get candy after finishing homework. They leaned in, eager, ready to promise me anything as long as it didn't require real humility. They had no idea what I was about to say. I want an apology, I said simply. You would think I asked them to give up their homes. Their faces fell instantly. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. It was like the idea of apologizing to me, the nobody, was unbearable. Mark scoffed. Come on, man, be serious. Jenna folded her arms. It was just a joke. Don't be dramatic. My mother shook her head. Why make things difficult? And that moment, that exact moment, was when every remaining piece of empathy inside me died. Because they couldn't even say sorry. Not even for show, not even fake. Not even to secure something they desperately wanted. I sat down on my couch and said calmly, if you can't apologize, the discussion is over. They erupted instantly. My father shouting, my mother crying, Jenna complaining about how I was being selfish, Mark threatening to call the company himself. I let them vent, let them panic, let them say all the things they thought would pressure me, but I said nothing. Eventually they stormed out, every one of them except Chloe. She lingered near the door, staring at me awkwardly. I thought she was going to apologize, but instead she whispered, Mom says you're going to ruin everything. I stared at her exhausted. And what do you think? She paused. For the first time, she didn't look smug or superior. She looked confused. I don't know, she said quietly. I didn't think you cared about stuff like this. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, Chloe. None of you thought. She left after that. The next 2 days were quiet, peaceful. They didn't contact me again. I figured they had decided to pretend I didn't exist again. I was fine with that. But then something unexpected happened. My company scheduled individual interviews with each potential investor to verify their legitimacy and assess risk factors. And since I was the coordinator, I received all the internal notes. When I opened Jenna's file, my jaw dropped. Her business was practically bankrupt. She had been drowning in debt for months. She was renting equipment instead of owning it. Her event planning success was held together with tape. If she didn't get new capital soon, she was done. Mark's situation was worse. His successful business, a fad aid. A single lucky investment had kept him afloat for years but had dried up. His current company was under tax review. He was bleeding money. They were desperate. Genuinely desperate. And yet they couldn't bring themselves to apologize to the very person who could help them. And I had to decide whether to help them anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything. The years of treatment, the disrespect, the laughter, the humiliation. But I also thought about the pressure they were under, the fear they must feel, the false pride they built their identities on. Maybe I should have felt satisfaction, but I didn't. I felt tired, exhausted, so I made a decision. The next morning, I called a family meeting at my place. They arrived cautiously, like I was some judge about to give a verdict on their lives. I could see the fear on their faces, the discomfort, the forced politeness. My father even brought fruit, pretending everything was normal. For the first time in years, they listened to me. Not because they respected me, but because they needed to. And I realized maybe that was enough. I cleared my throat and said, I reviewed your files. Their bodies tensed instantly. I know you're all struggling. I know things are harder than you pretend. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't enjoy you finally needing me for once. They looked at me with a mix of guilt and shame. But I'm not going to sabotage your futures because of what happened at dinner. My mother gasped with relief. Jenna grabbed her chest. Mark slumped back in his chair like he'd been saved from execution. But I raised my hand before they could thank me. However, I said, I'm approving your applications on one condition, one simple condition. They waited nervous. You will treat me with respect from now on. No more jokes at my expense. No more dismissive comments. No more acting like I'm beneath you. And you will teach your children to do the same. This time they didn't argue. Not even a little. They nodded quickly, desperately repeating, of course, again and again, and for the first time in my life I believed they meant it. Not because they suddenly loved me, but because they finally understood I wasn't the weak, quiet, disposable person they thought I was. I approved their applications, and over the following months, their businesses stabilized, they rebuilt, they prospered. And strangely, our relationship began to change too, slowly, awkwardly, but genuinely. They started asking about my work, including me in conversations, treating me like an actual member of the family. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And Chloe, she was the one who changed the most. One afternoon months later, while I was visiting Jenna's house, she came up to me quietly and handed me a drawing. It was a sketch of me, sitting at the dinner table, but this time, instead of being ignored, I was drawn as the only one with color. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for calling you a nobody." I placed the drawing carefully into my bag because honestly, that meant more to me than anything else my family had done. So here's what I learned: sometimes people don't realize your worth until they need you. Sometimes they only understand respect after they feel fear. And sometimes the only way to change the way people treat you is to stop accepting the role they've assigned you and make them see you for who you actually are,